The day my boss told me the promotion was going to someone else, I didn't say anything. I just nodded, thanked him for letting me know, and walked back to my desk. I sat down, pulled up my contract on my personal laptop, and read through every line of it. Then I closed it, took a slow breath, and smiled. I've been at Lakeshore Financial for 11 years. 11 years of 6 a.m. starts and emails answered at 10 p.m. 11 years of knowing every client by first name, every account by history, every quirk of our internal systems that nobody else bothered to learn. I was the person they called when something broke. I was the person new advisors shadowed in their first month. I was, if I'm being honest, the reason the Midtown branch had the retention numbers it did. And my boss gave the senior portfolio manager position to a man named Colton. Colton had been at Lakeshore for 14 months. 14 months. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly car payment. He talked about client experience optimization and relationship capital in meetings. And people nodded along like he was saying something real. He'd come from a bigger firm in New York, which apparently meant more to management than a decade of proven results at this one. I found out on a Tuesday. My boss, who I'll call my director because that's what he was, called me into his office at 4:30. He told me the decision had been made. He said they valued fresh perspective and dynamic leadership energy. He used the phrase fresh perspective twice. He could not meet my eyes when he said it. When I got back to my desk, my colleague 2 chairs down gave me a look. She'd heard. Word travels fast in an open floor plan. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," across the aisle, and I just shook my head and turned back to my screen. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, just the highway and my own thoughts. My daughter called that evening. She's a junior at Ohio State, pre-law, the kind of student who color codes her study schedule and still manages to be funny about it. She asked how my day was. I told her the truth. They gave it to the new guy, I said. There was a pause. Dad, are you serious? His name is Colton. He's been there 14 months. Another pause, longer this time. What are you going to do? I looked out the kitchen window. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The streetlights had just come on. I'm going to do exactly what my contract says, I told her. Nothing more, nothing less. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." The next morning I arrived at 8:58, not 7:15 like usual, not before the cleaning crew, not before the branch manager. 8:58, because my contract said 9 o'clock and I was learning to respect the document. I did not review overnight alerts before the team meeting. That had never been in my job description. It was something I'd taken on years ago because it made the morning smoother, and nobody had ever asked me to do it. They'd just gotten used to it being done. At 9 on the dot, I opened exactly the files I was responsible for and began working through them in order. At 12, I took a full lunch, not a desk sandwich, not 15 minutes in the break room with one eye on my inbox, a full hour. I walked to the deli 3 blocks away and sat by the window and ate a turkey club and read an article on my phone and didn't think about a single client account. When I came back, there were 2 notifications from internal chat. I answered them when I got to them. By the end of the first week, I noticed things starting to shift. The thing about making yourself indispensable is that nobody knows how indispensable you are until you stop. Not because you're hiding it, because they never asked. They assumed the machine ran itself. They assumed the clockwork wound itself up every morning. When I stopped doing the things I'd layered on top of my actual job, the early checks, the late responses, the informal client calls I fielded because I knew the accounts better than the assigned advisor, the internal knowledge base I'd been the unofficial curator of for 6 years, the gears started catching. The first call came from Colton. He pinged me Wednesday of week 2 asking about the Halverson account. There was a renewal coming up, and he couldn't find the notation on why we'd structured their allocation the way we had. I knew exactly why. I'd built that structure myself after a conversation with the client 3 years ago. The reason was in my notes, which were stored in a shared drive folder I'd organized myself and maintained myself. I replied, "The documentation is in the shared client notes under the Halverson subfolder. Should be everything you need there." It was. It wasn't organized the way a new person would expect, but I told him where to look. Whether he found it was his problem now. He had the title. He came back 20 minutes later. "I'm seeing a lot of files here. Can you walk me through which one is current?" I looked at the message. I thought about the 10 years I'd spent building that system. I thought about the word perspective. I thought about 14 months. "I have a client. Call in 10 minutes." I wrote back. "The file dated March 2024 in that folder is the most recent version. Good luck." I had no client call. I had a cup of coffee and a spreadsheet. But I also had a job description, and walking new hires through systems I built on my own time was not in it. The Halverson renewal was not the crisis. The crisis came 3 weeks later. We had a corporate client. I won't name them, but they were one of our largest accounts. A regional manufacturer out of Columbus with about $4 million under management and a pension allocation that needed quarterly rebalancing. They've been with Lakeshore for 12 years. I'd been their main point of contact for 9 of those years. My director had, about 6 months before Colton arrived, started transitioning them to Colton's portfolio as part of the plan to set him up for the promotion. I had flagged in writing twice that the transition was moving faster than was advisable given how relationship-oriented this particular client was. They were old school. They liked familiarity. They called me by name and asked about my daughter. My director had thanked me for the feedback and continued the transition anyway. The quarterly rebalancing for this client was due the last week of October. This was not new. It happened every October. It was on the shared calendar. It was in the account management system. There was, in fact, a checklist I had built in our project management tool that walks through every step of the rebalancing process, because 3 years ago, a junior advisor had made an error on a different account, and I'd built the checklist to make sure it never happened again. The checklist was still there, in the same system, under the same client name. Colton had access to it. On the 23rd of October, I completed every task that was currently assigned to me in that system. I did not complete the tasks that had been reassigned to Colton when my director moved the account. That was standard. You don't touch another advisor's assigned tasks without being asked. I went home at 5:15. My phone started buzzing at 7:42 p.m. I looked at the screen. It was my director. I let it go to voicemail. I know that sounds cold, but my contract, which I had now read 3 more times, said nothing about after-hours availability except in cases of pre-agreed client emergencies with at least 48 hours of notice. Nowhere in my job description did it say I was required to be on call in the evenings for situations that arose from other people's tasks. I listened to the voicemail before bed. My director's voice was strained. There was something about the Columbus account. Something about a rebalancing window. Something about a client who had called the branch directly. I set my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. I arrived at 9:01 the next morning. There were 11 unread messages in the internal chat. 3 emails marked urgent. A sticky note on my monitor that said call director ASAP in what I recognized as the handwriting of the branch administrator. I sat down, logged in, and looked at the messages in order. The Columbus client had called the branch the previous evening because the expected quarterly statement hadn't been initiated. Their CFO, a no-nonsense woman I'd worked with for 7 years, had noticed the timing was off and called to ask what was happening. Nobody who answered the phone knew. Colton, apparently, had not been reachable. The rebalancing window was a 48-hour process once initiated. It had not been initiated. The window was closing in about 30 hours. My director appeared at my desk at 9:12. He looked like he hadn't slept. His collar wasn't quite straight. He pulled up a chair without asking and sat down. "I need your help," he said. I looked at him. "In what capacity?" He blinked. "I'm sorry. Which specific tasks are you asking me to take on, so I can make sure they align with my current workload and role responsibilities?" He stared at me for a moment. I watched something shift in his expression. The slow recognition that I was not going to make this easy, and that I had every right not to. The Columbus rebalancing, he said. We need it initiated today. The Columbus account was reassigned to Colton in August. I know. And he's unavailable. He's dealing with a family situation. I didn't say anything to that. It wasn't Colton's personal life that had created this problem. Can you step in? My director asked. I can take a look at where things stand, I said, but I'll need that request in writing as a formal reassignment, because if I'm doing work outside my current role description for an account not assigned to me, that needs to be documented. He looked at me like I'd said something in another language. In writing, I repeated. An email is fine. He sent the email from his phone while sitting at my desk. It took 4 minutes. I initiated the Columbus rebalancing by 10:45. It wasn't hard. The checklist was right there. The account history was thorough. 11 years of documentation doesn't vanish. The client's CFO called at 2 p.m. She asked for me by name. I just want to make sure we're in good hands, she said. You are, I told her. The rebalancing is on track. You'll see the statement initiation confirmation in your portal by end of day. Good, she said. I'll be honest with you. I've been a little uncertain about some of the changes over there. You've always been straight with us. I thanked her and said I'd make sure things stayed on track. I did not say anything else about the changes over there. November was quieter, at least on the surface. I continued arriving at 9, leaving at 5:15, taking full lunches. I continued answering only messages within my assigned scope. I stopped joining the informal standing meeting that happened most Fridays at 4:30, the one where my director and a few of the senior advisors would gather near the corner office and talk through the week. I had never been required to attend. I had simply always attended. Nobody said anything about my absence for 2 weeks. Then my director mentioned it in passing. I said I'd had other things on my plate and left it at that. In the meantime, I started doing something I hadn't done in years. I started updating my resume. I wasn't sure I wanted to leave Lakeshore. I'd built something real there. I knew the systems, the clients, the rhythms of the place. But I also knew that the moment you stop being curious about what else is out there, you lose your leverage. You become someone who stays not because it's right, but because the alternative is unknown. I reached out quietly to a few contacts I had at other firms. I had lunch with a regional director at a competitor. I'll call it Westbridge Wealth, someone I'd met at a conference in Cleveland 3 years back. We caught up. I mentioned I was open to conversations. She mentioned they were expanding their Columbus presence. She asked if I'd be interested in hearing more. I said yes. The second crisis came in December. There was a prospective client, a family-owned logistics company out of Dayton, third generation, looking to move significant assets under management. This was the kind of account that didn't come around often. My director had been cultivating the relationship for months. I knew about it because I'd been CDH on some early correspondence and had attended one introductory meeting in September. The pitch meeting was scheduled for December 8th. My director was presenting. Colton was supposed to be the assigned lead on the account if we landed it. On December 6th, my director forwarded me an email thread and asked if I could review the proposal before the meeting and flag anything that looked off. This was not in my job description. I wrote back, happy to take a look. Can you let me know if this is a formal project assignment so I can allocate time accordingly? He replied, it would really just be a favor. You know this space better than anyone. I read that message a couple of times. A favor. I'd been giving favors for 11 years. The favors had compounded into a reputation, a track record, a contribution that apparently was worth a little less than a dynamic leadership energy assessment, and 14 months on the job. I have a full slate this week, I wrote back. If you'd like to formally adjust my project load to include this review, I'm glad to help. Otherwise, I'd recommend reaching out to whoever is assigned to support the Dayton pitch. He did not respond to that email. The pitch meeting on December 8th went fine, apparently. They didn't land the account. I heard through the branch administrator that the prospective client had some reservations about the depth of experience on the assigned team. I didn't say anything when I heard that. I just nodded. I had a second lunch with the regional director from Westbridge in mid-December. This time she brought a VP of client relations. We sat in a restaurant in the short north and talked for 2 hours. They talked about their growth clients, the Columbus market, the kind of senior advisor they were looking for. They asked about my book of business, my client relationships, my philosophy on long-term financial planning. I was honest about everything except the specifics of accounts still at Lakeshore, which would have been inappropriate to discuss. By the end of the lunch, they'd made a preliminary offer. Senior wealth advisor, a base salary that was meaningfully higher than what I was making, a performance bonus structure, and the thing that caught my attention most, full autonomy over client relationship management. No reassignments without advisor agreement. It was, apparently, a policy they'd put in writing after losing several good people to exactly the kind of situation I'd experienced. I told them I needed a few days to think. I drove home from that lunch differently than I'd driven home the day my director told me about Colton. The screen on my badge reader flashed red in 2:47 on a Tuesday edit. My daughter came home for winter break the week before Christmas. She was sitting at the kitchen table working on a moot court outline. When I told her about Westbridge, she put her pen down. "What's the offer?" she asked. I told her the numbers. She picked her pen back up, wrote something on her notepad, then put it down again. "Dad, that's 22% more than you're making now." "I know. And they can't reassign your clients without your agreement. In writing. It's in the offer letter." She looked at me for a long moment. She has her mother's way of reading a room. Quiet and thorough. Not in a rush. "What's holding you back?" I thought about it. 11 years is a long time to build something. "You built it," she said. "It's not going anywhere, and neither are your clients." She was right about that. I'd built those relationships. The clients trusted me, not the Lakeshore letterhead. Some of them had followed advisors before when those advisors moved. That's how this business works, if you've actually done the work. "Also," she said, going back to her outline, "they clearly don't deserve you." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. I gave my notice on January 4th, a Tuesday. I walked into my director's office at 9:30, closed the door, sat down, and handed him an envelope. He looked at it. He looked at me. He opened it. 2 weeks, I said. "As per my contract." The expression on his face went through several phases. Surprise first, then something that looked almost like panic, then a controlled attempt at composure. "Let's talk about this," he said. "I'm happy to talk," I said. "But the decision is made." He asked if it was about the promotion. I said it was about a lot of things, and that was true. It was about the promotion, yes, but it was also about 11 years of giving more than the job required, and watching that contribution get treated as a baseline expectation rather than a value to be recognized. It was about being asked for favors while the person who got my promotion was called a leader. It was about that email. It would really just be a favor. He asked if there was anything Lakeshore could do to retain me. "The time to do that was August," I said. He nodded slowly. He knew I was right. I spent my 2 weeks completing every assigned task in full, documenting everything meticulously and not doing a single thing outside my job description. I made sure that whoever came after me would have everything they needed, not because Lakeshore deserved my thoroughness, but because the clients did. The Columbus CFO, the Halverson family, the people who trusted me with their financial lives for a decade. On my last day, I cleared my desk, returned my badge, and shook hands with the colleagues I respected, which was most of them. The branch administrator hugged me. She'd known something was wrong for months, she said. "You were the one keeping the lights on," she said. "I know," I said. "They'll figure that out eventually." I started at Westbridge in late January. Within the first month, 7 of my long-term clients had transferred their accounts. 7. The Columbus CFO was the third call I made. She said she'd been waiting to see where I landed. Colton, I heard through the branch administrator, who still texted me occasionally, was struggling. The book of business he'd inherited was eroding. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but steadily. Clients who'd been comfortable with Lakeshore for years were suddenly asking questions, requesting reviews, exploring options. My director was in conversations with regional management about the branch's retention numbers. I wasn't happy about that exactly. I didn't want anyone to fail, but there's a lesson in it, and it's not a complicated one. If you build something real, if you do the work every day for years and build trust with people who depend on you, that is worth something. It's worth something specific and measurable. And if the people above you can't see that, or won't act like they see it, then you have every right and maybe an obligation to yourself to find somewhere that can. My daughter texted me at the end of my first week at Westbridge. Just 4 words. How's the new job? I sat at my desk in the new office, looked out the window at the Columbus skyline, and typed back. Like breathing again. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the day my director told me about Colton, not the Columbus crisis, not the Dayton pitch that went nowhere. The moment I keep coming back to is Sandra at my desk handing me that sticky note that said, "Call director ASAP," and the look on her face, the look of someone who had watched the whole thing play out and already knew exactly how it ended. She knew because she'd been there every morning when I arrived early. She'd seen the emails I sent at 9 p.m. She'd watched me build systems nobody asked me to build, document processes nobody asked me to document, field calls nobody else wanted to take. She knew what I was worth, even when the people making decisions about titles and salaries seemed to have forgotten. What I've come to understand is that the situation had its own internal logic, and it was always going to play out the way it did. Not because the universe was keeping score in some cosmic ledger, but because actions have consequences that are sometimes just slow to arrive. I gave 11 years of real work. That work created real relationships. Those relationships belong to the trust between me and my clients, not to a letterhead, not to a job title, not to whoever sat in the senior portfolio manager chair. When I stopped propping up a structure that didn't value what I brought to it, the structure showed exactly what it was made of. That's cause and effect. It's not complicated, but it takes a certain kind of clarity to see it when you're in the middle of it. I think about what it actually took to get through those months between August and January. There's something people don't talk about enough when they tell stories like this. The discipline it takes to stop, to not send the email, to not pick up the phone, to not walk over and fix the thing you can see is broken, even when every instinct you built over a career is telling you to fix it. That's not passivity. That restraint took more out of me some days than any 60-hour week ever did. It required me to trust that doing the right thing for myself was not the same as doing the wrong thing for everyone else. And it required me to be honest with my director, with myself, about what I was and wasn't willing to continue accepting. My daughter asked me, the night I got the Westbridge offer, what had taken me so long. She didn't mean it unkindly. She was 20 years old and she could see it clearly. The way young people sometimes see things clearly. The way young people sometimes see things clearly, precisely because they haven't yet learned to rationalize. The honest answer is that I'd confused loyalty with self-erasure. I thought staying late and doing more than required was a form of integrity, and maybe it was, for a while. But integrity also means knowing your own value and refusing to participate in its diminishment. It means having the patience to let things reveal themselves rather than reacting in anger. It means being the kind of person who walks out of a building after 11 years with every task documented and every client protected, even when the building didn't deserve that from you. Avery transferred her account to Westbridge 6 days after I started. She told me she'd been waiting to see where I landed. That sentence meant more to me than the salary increase. The 7 clients who followed me, they didn't follow a title. They followed 11 years of showing up and meaning it. That's the only thing that's actually transferable in this business, or in any business. The work you do with real care eventually speaks in a language that titles and org charts can't override. I'm not bitter about Lakeshore. I learned more there than I give it credit for, including The lesson that came at the end. What I carry forward is simpler than I expected. Do the real work, know what it's worth, and don't let anyone else's inability to see it convince you that it isn't there.